In 1973, a graduate student at a dusty university library underlined a sentence in a textbook that, for the next 50 years, would be repeated wrong by basically every documentary you've ever watched. The sentence said, average life expectancy in the Stone Age was about 30 years. That sentence is technically correct. It is also, in the way it lands in your brain, completely wrong. Because when you hear average lifespan, 30 years, your brain pictures a Stone Age person turning 30, looking around the cave, and dropping dead from old age. That is not what happened. A Stone Age person who made it to 30 was, by their society standards, kind of just hitting their stride. A meaningful number of them made it to 60, 70, some past that. The "they died at 30" thing is one of the most confidently repeated statistical mistakes in popular history. And once you see why the math is misleading, you'll never hear the cliché the same way again. So buckle in. We're about to do some surprisingly fun arithmetic with dead people. By the end of this video, you're going to walk around with a better picture of your ancestors in your head than basically anyone in your group chat, and probably anyone who narrates documentaries with a fake British accent for a living. The number you keep hearing, 25, 30, 33 years, is a specific thing called life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy at birth is not how long a typical adult lived. It's an average of every single person born, including the ones who died at 3 weeks old. And in the Stone Age, a lot of people died very young. Estimates from synthesized hunter-gatherer mortality data put first-year infant mortality somewhere around 15 to 20%. Call it roughly 1 in 6 babies not making it to their first birthday. And another big chunk didn't survive to age 15. By the time you total it up, somewhere around 4 out of every 10 kids born were gone before they hit adulthood. So now you have a population where roughly 4 in 10 people don't make it out of childhood. What do you think that does to the average? It drags it down. Hard. Imagine a tiny village of 10 people. 5 of them die before age 2. The other 5 all live to 70. Average lifespan in that village? About 36 years. Did anyone in that village actually die at 36? No, not one. The average describes a person who doesn't exist. That is exactly what's going on with the Stone Age lifespan was 30 headline. It's a real number describing a fictional person. And once your gut feels that distinction, the rest of this episode is going to feel embarrassingly obvious. The fix is so simple, it's almost funny. You don't measure life expectancy from birth. You measure it from the moment someone makes it to about 15. Why 15? Because by then, the brutal infant and child mortality filter has already removed the people it was going to remove. The people still standing at 15 are, basically, healthy enough to keep going for a while. And when you run that number, life expectancy conditional on surviving to 15, for ancient and pre-modern populations, the answer is not 30. It's often something like another 40 to 50 more years on top. Meaning the typical person who survived their dangerous childhood was not staring down their 30th birthday like a death sentence. Entirely unbothered. Cream background. Caption red. Still fine. They were planning around being 60. The Stone Age cliché conflates two completely different things: the brutal odds of making it out of childhood and the actual length of an adult life. Survive childhood, and you were probably going to be around for a long, long time, which is wildly different from the documentary version. And that gap between what the documentary says and what the data says is basically the entire reason we keep getting ancient humans wrong in our heads. Let's talk specifics. When researchers look at skeletal remains from ancient populations, the bones of people who actually lived in the Paleolithic, they can estimate age at death from things like dental wear, the closure of skull sutures, joint surfaces in the pelvis, and bone changes from a lifetime of use. The method is imperfect. Old bones don't come with a birth certificate stapled to the femur. In fact, these methods consistently tend to underestimate how old the oldest people in a sample really were. But the broad pattern that shows up over and over is this. A meaningful portion of adult skeletons in ancient samples are people who lived well into their 50s, 60s, and beyond. Not a few, not a curiosity, a real chunk of the adult population. Anthropologists Rachel Kaspari and Sang-Hee Lee published a paper in PNAS in 2004 showing that the ratio of older adults to younger adults in human populations jumped dramatically around the Upper Paleolithic. For every 10 younger adults, the older adult count roughly quadrupled, meaning even tens of thousands of years ago, surviving to grandparent age was not a freak occurrence. It was happening often enough to actually change population structure. This matters because a lot of the human stuff we think of as modern, passing down knowledge, teaching grandkids, telling stories around fires, those things require old people to actually exist. If everyone really had been dropping dead at 30, we wouldn't have had the cognitive infrastructure to build basically any of the cool things we built. No oral tradition. No accumulated craft knowledge. No, talk to your grandma about that plant before you eat it. The fact that humans absolutely did do all of those things very early is itself evidence that old people existed. You don't get cave painting traditions out of a population that only knows teenagers. You don't get fire-making protocols and stone tool techniques and hunting strategies refined over generations if every generation is also the last one. Knowledge needs survivors. Survivors need to get old. And the people in those caves did. In 2007, two researchers named Michael Girvin and Hillard Kaplan published a paper in Population and Development Review that basically settled this debate. What they did was take mortality data from a bunch of contemporary hunter-gatherer and forager-horticulturalist groups, populations that, while not exact replicas of the Paleolithic, live closer to that lifestyle than basically anyone else on Earth. Groups like the Aceh of Paraguay, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Kung of Botswana. They synthesized the mortality patterns across these groups, and what they found was consistent and clear. In hunter-gatherer populations, infant and child mortality is brutal. Child mortality rates up to 100 times higher than in modern industrial societies. But the people who survive that gauntlet are surprisingly durable. The modal age of adult death, meaning the most common age at which adults in these populations die, comes out around 72, with a range of about 68 to 78 across the populations they looked at. 72. In a population with no doctors, no antibiotics, no surgery, no grocery store. That's not, they all died at 30. That is approximately your retirement age. Now, important asterisk. Modal age of adult death is not the same as average lifespan including everyone. Childhood mortality still pulled the at-birth average way down. But the people walking around as adults in these populations were absolutely living long lives, in human terms. And the closer you look at the data, the more the ancient humans were short-lived picture really does fall apart. We probably weren't, on the inside, all that different from the people Girvin and Kaplan studied. So the same shape, high early mortality, durable adults, most likely held for Paleolithic foragers too. Anatomically modern humans have been around for roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years. The biology of getting old hasn't been quietly rewritten in the last few thousand. Here's where this gets actually interesting. Once you accept that adult Stone Age humans were living to grandparent age, a bunch of stories you've heard about ancient people stop making sense. Story 1. Marriage at 13 because they only had a few years to reproduce. Mostly not true. If you've got a 60-year horizon, you don't have to start at 13. Story 2. They didn't develop complex culture because they died too fast to pass things down. Backwards. They developed complex culture partly because old people existed to pass things down. Story 3, and this is the big one. Modern medicine doubled human lifespan. This is a partial truth wearing a marketing costume. What modern medicine and modern hygiene mostly did, and it is a genuinely massive achievement, is crush infant and child mortality. The reason average lifespan rocketed from the 30s to the 70s and 80s over the last couple of centuries is largely because we stopped losing so many babies and toddlers. Adults did start living somewhat longer too, but the biggest chunk of that headline number came from the bottom of the curve, not the top. It's because the part of the curve that was killing babies and toddlers got mostly knocked out. Adults living to 70 is, in deep evolutionary terms, kind of normal. Babies dying constantly is the abnormal thing we specifically fixed, which is, honestly, a way more accurate and way more hopeful story than the one where ancient humans were tragic, short-lived creatures, and you, in your apartment with Wi-Fi, are the chosen, long-lived endpoint of progress. You aren't the first long-lived human. You're just the first long-lived human in a population where almost all the babies make it too. That's the actual achievement, not extending the top end, filling in the bottom. So next time some documentary narrator with a dramatic accent tells you, in prehistoric times, the average lifespan was just 30 years, you can hear what's actually being said. It's not ancient humans only lived 30 years. It's ancient humans had a lot of babies who didn't make it, and the math gets dragged down. The grandparent in the cave was real. The storyteller by the fire was real. The 70-year-old elder showing the kid which routes are safe, real. The myth is that they weren't. You inherited a brain built for long lives. A body that, if it dodged the major early life threats, was statistically likely to keep going for another half-century. You're using that exact biology right now. They were using it then. And the next time someone at a dinner party confidently tells you that people only lived to 30 back then, you get to do the most fun thing in the world. You get to explain conditional life expectancy at age 15 to someone who did not ask. Curious which other ancient humans were way worse than us story is also nonsense. Subscribe. Thursday's question is about how dumb cavemen really were. Spoiler, not very.